we have Dr. Andre Garcia, and he is a native of southern Brazil and did his BS and MS at Moringa State University. Hopefully I said that correctly. All right. He completed his PhD in a short postdoc with the Georgia group. And he has worked in a variety of different species, and we're really lucky to have him now focused on beef cattle in his position at Angus Genetics, Inc., where he focuses on research and development. He interfaces with the information systems team and is also involved in a lot of their producer education efforts. So with that, please welcome Andre.
Thank you, Maggie, for the introduction, and thanks everybody for coming here and listening to me speak a little bit about this project. So what I'm going to talk about today is this project we've been working on with together with the Canadian Angus Association and the Australian Angus Association. I got to do a lot of the research going into this implementation, but of course, very thankful for our internal team and our colleagues in both of those associations right throughout those research projects. And basically what we've been doing is collaborating, right, and combining the data sources from the three associations to provide not only genetic evaluations for our breeds across countries, but also do a lot of research and development. As you guys can imagine, in different countries, beef production, right, we face the same challenges. And so it's nice to combine resources to answer some of those questions. So I will start with a little bit of background. So the American Angus evaluation has been combined with the Canadian Angus Association data since the year 2000. So those genetic evaluations have been running together, combining all the pedigrees, genotypes, and phenotypes since the year 2000, basically. And so that has been a very good partnership, right, from both a research standpoint, but also providing genetic evaluation. So if breeders are interested in buying bulls or selling bulls across the borders between the US and Canada, they can do so, and the numbers are comparable, which is very beneficial. As I think, as better of a job as we can do in making the EPDs and the genetic tools simpler for breeders to understand and utilize, I think that is for everybody's benefit. Of course, the goals for a partnership like that, right, is to facilitate the international commerce and the exchange of genetics across the borders. Again, if it's easier for the breeders to understand the numbers, they can look at one set of numbers, compare animals, and then make their breeding decisions. Then it's easy to bring animals across the border. Of course, for semen exchange, that's also very beneficial. It's just mutually beneficial for breeders in both countries. Those efforts, a lot of the time, right, focuses on genetic evaluations, but of course, as we know, once we pull data sources together, that gives us a lot of power and a lot of ideas to do research, and so that has been a great collaboration with the Canadian Angus Association. And so really, this partnership had been going on for a while, right? But then, of course, at the World Angus Secretariat, there was a call to action a few years ago, and I wasn't at Angus at that time, right? But we had a representative there at the organization, and basically, right, the World Angus Secretariat will pull individuals from Angus associations across the globe, and so they have these meetings, and basically at that time, they had a discussion about we should really pull these databases together and combine these genetic evaluations. So that way we could facilitate research efforts, but also be able to compare the animals on the same base across different Angus associations. So at that time, people from the American Angus Association that were at the meeting, they thought we would be uniquely positioned to do that. And especially because Angus genetics has a big footprint across different countries, right? I think, of course, Canada and Australia would be good examples of that. But even across different countries, the breeders in the US have done a great job of collecting data and selecting animals, making genetic improvement. And so it would be a good effort for the American Angus Association to take on and try to combine those databases. Additionally, right through AGI, we would have a lot of the R&D and the IT infrastructure necessary to be able to pull some of these data sets together and be able to crunch those genetic evaluations. And so at that point, AGI, they decided to take the lead on the research efforts, and basically Australia was very interested in combining the databases with us, and so they were brought on board in that project. At that point, they decided to start with the foot score evaluations. So for you guys are probably familiar with this, right? That the genetic evaluation for food score in Angus is relatively new. And at that point, right, 2018, 2017, when they had these discussions, it made a lot of sense to look into food scores because it was a relatively new phenotype being measured in the US. But the Angus Australian folks have been reporting, the breeders have been reporting food scores for a long time. And so it would be very beneficial, specifically for the breeders in the US, as that would bring a lot of data into the genetic evaluations. And I will show a little bit of what that data looks like in the next few slides too. Of course, as you can start thinking about a project like this, combining databases and pedigrees, phenotypes and genotypes, the sharing, and just thinking about IDs and double registrations and things like that. So a lot of the initial research, it's really just to put the infrastructure together to be able to combine the databases, right? There's a lot of the initial work was done on that sense. Of course, they were very on board with the project and were willing to share the genotypes, the pedigrees, and the phenotypes. Of course, in today's world, I think that's a big challenge, right? Of course, we want to pull data together to increase the power of our research, but it's always a challenge to share data. And so we're very thankful for them being partners with us on these projects, being able to share all the information. So once the pipelines were in place, right, and being able to share all the data, adding Australian data to that food score evaluation really almost pretty much doubled the number of phenotypes that we had in the database. So this is what I'm representing here in this graph. You can see that food structure evaluation is a two-trait evaluation. So we have food angle and claw set, and you can see here the representation of the data from each country at that point. So pretty much a 50-50 split between the US and Australia, which means we doubled the size of the database in terms of phenotypic records for food scores once that project was put together. From a genetic evaluations perspective and from an accuracy of prediction, that's very beneficial, right, in increasing the number of phenotypes. This evaluation, again, was put together. The evaluation with the 3 countries for food score was released in 2020. And so it was very successful. Not too long ago, we had an AGI intern that did some work on that evaluation as well, Amanda Alvarenga. She was from a PhD student from Purdue and got a paper published out there, which was nice. She did a lot of work on the evaluation that was already running, right? But some of the validation and verifying our cross-country predictions as well. After that release, right, with the food score evaluations, there was appetite for more. And so people were really interested. And of course, as people started seeing those numbers and using them in their breeding programs, whether that was in the US or Canada or Australia, and they were really interested in doing some more and expanding the project. So basically at that point, we had already the pipeline and the research done for 1 genetic evaluation. So it made sense that we would continue to develop some more traits. And so basically, we would continue those efforts, right, but then start trying to get some more phenotypes and put together some of the other genetic evaluations with data from Australia as well. And so basically, in expanding those genetic evaluations, we decided to tackle on the growth evaluation, cavities, carcass, and scrotal circumference. So add a bunch of traits, right, on these 4 different models, and basically bringing in the data from Australia into this project. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the phenotypes and what that did to the databases, right? Of course, every time we talk about adding phenotypes is very beneficial for genetic evaluations. So we were really interested in adding the Australian data to those genetic evaluations as well. So here's a representation. So here I have for the growth phenotypes, I chose to present the weaning weights. And here I have also cavities or African cavities evaluation. Of course, as you look into that pie chart for weaning weights, the American Angus Association, we already have a large database of weaning weights, right? That's a trait that people have been measuring for a long time, and it's a relatively easy trait to measure. And then as you see on that pie chart, we added about 1.2 million records from Australian animals. So it's always beneficial adding more phenotypes, especially on newer animals. And then as you look into cavities, we have about 1.7 million from the US. And then with Australia, we added about 250,000 more records. And these phenotypes are phenotypes that we added into the evaluation. Of course, between getting the raw data, doing all the edits, quality control and all of that. Of course, we clear some of the data out, and here I'm not gonna go into details of the research process of, validating, making sure that the traits are actually the same trait that we're predicting, but we did a lot of that work to be able to make sure that we can combine those genetic evaluations in the first place. Here's one that's it's more interesting, right? Because of course we know, especially carcass traits are hard and difficult to measure and to collect data. And so it was very beneficial to add. Of course, it's not as expressive as we saw in the other traits. We do have about 135,000 carcass records in the American Angus database. And then we had about 10 to 15,000 records from Angus, Australia for each of those traits. Again, it's not a very expressive number, but I think especially as we talk about actual carcass phenotypes, adding 10, 15,000 records at once in the evaluation is very beneficial. As you look across on the other graph, you can see for the ultrasound records, we added about 500,000 phenotypes for those evaluations. Of course, that's when we get all the database from Angus, Australia, right, to be able to combine the data sets. But I think there's a benefit here because they continue to collect data the same as the breeders in the US and Canada. And so now the pipelines are established. And so as they continue to grow their programs to measure phenotypes on their side, everybody benefits as the data keeps coming together. As you look here is the food score again. So here I'm just selected one of the food score traits. You can see the numbers are a little bit different, right? And the split is a little bit different. Of course, the graph that I presented before was from when the evaluation was put together. Nowadays, I think the food score has been really taken by the breeders in the US, and they have done a great job in phenotyping animals for those two traits with Ango and Clawsat. And so now the split is a little bit shifted. There's a little bit more US data compared to Australia. But we still get quite a bit of data from Australia as well as Canada as well. The other trait that we had on the mix was scrotal circumference. So we have just a little over 1 million records from the US, and then we added 91,000 from Australia. Of course, we also have Canadian data on those evaluations, right? But the Canadian data has always been together in those evaluations. So that's why I'm highlighting Angus, Australia here, because it was the new data that we had. Similarly, in Canada, we continue to add data as they continue recording those phenotypes. Now, we looked into the phenotypes, right? And of course, there's a lot of work to make sure that those traits are similar in their measure, and they were measuring the same trait. But I think one of the things that is really neat is as we talk about the genetic evaluation itself, right? It's nice to look into the pedigrees as you connect those databases, because of course, it's a nice idea to combine those data sets together, but if you just concatenate the data files, but if there's no actually pedigree connections, really there's no point, right? You're just putting the data sets together, but eventually they are siloed in their own. But actually we do have pedigree connections. So what we did is a little bit of an investigation to find out, okay, how much connection in those pedigrees there are. And so basically here, what I'm presenting is basically, if you take, this is from the growth evaluation, right? If you take all the Canadian progeny in that growth pedigree, basically you can see in purple, 77% of those individuals are progeny of Canadian sires, which makes sense, right? The vast majority of the Canadian progeny in the data are progeny of Canadian sires. But we do have about 23% of those that are progeny of US sires. And so that's really interesting because that, of course, that's where the connection between the populations and the data sets come together, right? And thinking about the breeding perspective, it's important that those connections exist so that we can take advantage of those phenotypes for the predictions. As we look into the Australian population, it's a very similar picture as well. We do have, about 80% of those individuals from Australia are progeny of Australian sire, and then we have about 19 or 20% that are progeny of US sires, and about 1% of those are progeny of Canadian sires. So I think that's really interesting. I don't have here results broken down by years, right? But of course, as especially those evaluations get published across countries, our expectation is people will source genetics from the different countries that will increase even more the usage of sires across countries. The other piece of that also is genotypes. We know that genomics is great to be able to connect populations, right? And so as we put together those pedigrees, but also create genomic relationships between those individuals, genotypes can be very helpful in connecting those data points. So I have an example, the distribution on the right-hand side over there for me is the distribution of genotyped animals. So you can see the US has about 1.5 million genotyped animals. And then we got about 270,000 from Australia and about 30,000 from Canada. And then what you can see on the other graph, this is a principal component analysis that we did using genotypes from all the three countries. And you can see as you put together the principal component analysis, on the y-axis and on the x-axis, you see the first two principal components. And basically the colors would be individuals, right, or the genomic relationship of those individuals. And you can see a very big overlap between those three populations. You can see the x-axis is hard to read, but it's very small. And if you look into the percentage of variance explained, it's a very small percentage of variance, which means essentially, right, those three populations, they are basically the same. And so this was also good for us to see, right, that there is basically, that tells us there is a lot of strong connections in those three populations. And of course, having genotypes in the genomic evaluation help us connect those dots. So this World Angus evaluation and this expansion part, like I said, I got to work on a lot of those, of the research efforts that we put together before publishing those evaluations. But we were happy to publish this evaluation and expand it to the new traits in October of last year. And so that expansion involved, of course, the 11 new traits that we talked about with growth, carcass, scrotal circumference, and cavities. And then, of course, the two that we already have, foot score traits with foot angle and claw set. With that World Angus evaluation, we also released the International Sire Search. So basically, that's a tool breeders can go online and then can search sires, right? And the sires would be for all those different traits. And they can pull up the rankings or the EPDs for those individual sires. And then, of course, you will have sires from the US, Canada, and Australia in that search as well. If you go to do a search on that search tool online, if an animal is from Canada or from Australia, that would also give you a link to go to their database and see the numbers over there in details, so like pedigree and things like that. So it's a very useful tool for breeders as well as they go online and get to search individual animals across the databases. After the release, right, we've been hearing very good feedback from breeders. And of course, we have throughout this project, right, we have had a lot of interactions and meetings with people from the Angus Australia and also the Canadian Angus Association. And so it's been very helpful to put this together, but also to collect feedback now that we have released, right? And we see that people are interested, they look for individual animals in those searches, and it's been very good feedback from breeders across the countries. I think as we talk about things like this and combining databases, there's more opportunities ahead, of course. And if you were in Dr. Christine Bay's presentation this morning, I really enjoyed when she mentioned about some of these new phenotypes that we're interested in collecting. They are very hard, and maybe as individual entities or countries might be very, very helpful for us to collect large number of data points. But as we come together and combine these databases where it's possible, right, I think this could be beneficial. Not only for traits like weaning weight that everybody measures in large amounts, but also for more difficult to measure traits, I think this could be very helpful. As we think about new traits that we're thinking about investigating next, hopefully in this World Angus evaluation environment, we talk a lot about feed deficiency, which would be an example of a very expensive trait. I think if we manage to combine the data sets there, would give us a lot of strength. Cow longevity, I think, is one that they are also, Angus Australia and Canada are also interested, especially now with our functional longevity research EPD coming out, heifer pregnancy and so on. I think that by combining those databases, right, we have benefits from a prediction accuracy and from a statistical standpoint, but I think it's also about combining resources and expertise. Like I mentioned, we had many very good discussions with Canada and Australia trying to come up with solutions for beef producers, right? They are membership organizations like we are, and they have some of the similar issues that we do have here. And so once you combine not only the data power, but also the brain power of all those people involved, I think everybody benefits. Like I mentioned, we have shared interests, right, from both from a genetic evaluation perspective, but also to advance research and provide solutions to our breeders. That would also promote exchange of genetics. I think going in, we already knew there was some pedigree overlap and exchange of semen or bulls across different countries. Hopefully, this initiative will increase that even more and give breeders an opportunity to either sell or source genetics from different countries if they want to. And ultimately, I think we have the same goal, which is provide better tools for our Angus producers, right? And so I think that benefits from no matter if it's a Canadian Angus member or Angus Australia member or US member, I think that benefits them in the end of the day. To wrap up here my presentation, I think if you want to have really great outcomes, right, you need great people. And so I just very thankful for our internal AGI team for all the help on these projects and all the discussions, but also Steve Miller, Christian Duff, and Kadra for all their help throughout this process. And again, it's the exchange of the ideas, and it's just a pleasure to work with these guys. And so I appreciate everybody's help. And with that, I appreciate you guys coming to listen to me and be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.